Welcome to Popcorn Psychology, the podcast where we watch blockbuster movies and psychoanalyze them. My name is Brittany Brownfield, and I'm a child therapist, and I'm joined by...
Ben Stover, individual therapist.
Hannah Espinoza, marriage and family therapist.
We are all licensed clinical professional counselors, also known as therapists, who practice out of Chicago. Even though we are licensed mental health professionals, this podcast is purely for entertainment purposes and to fulfill our love of dissecting pop culture in all forms.
Please remember that even though we are all licensed therapists, we aren't your therapist.
If you are struggling with mental health symptoms, please find a local mental health provider. Hi, we are back. We're going to start spooky season early this year. We're going to talk about Get Out today. We're going to discuss hypnosis, fact versus fiction, the spectrum of racism, trauma, and then treatment and final thoughts like we always do. So for anybody who doesn't know what Get Out is, that seems odd in general if you don't know what it is, kind of, actually.
Considering it got nominated and won for Best Original Screenplay?
Oh, yeah, it did. Yeah, he won an Oscar for this movie. So I don't know. I don't feel like we need to tell people about this movie. Anybody else?
I mean,
well,
a quick plot synopsis might be helpful.
If we've done it for things like It's a Wonderful Life, we probably could do it for this.
That's fair. Okay.
If we had to do a plot synopsis for Halloween, we could do for this. So Get Out is about a young black man. It's movies by Jordan Peele, who goes to visit his white girlfriend's family for the first time, and then slowly learns that they are actually, I don't know, I guess you'd say modern day slave owners, basically, and that they are luring black men to them in order to sell them to other white people to do hypnosis and brain transplants. Kapow.
To which they put their consciousness into this other person while retaining that person's lower, more primal brain functions, because they can't take out the whole brain without stopping the body, but they basically combine brains.
Yeah. Yeah. So the movie starts with, I think the biggest takeaway from this movie that people, other than the obviously racial metaphors and things, which we'll get into, is like the hypnosis piece. And why we really want to talk about this movie, amongst other things, was the hypnosis piece, because Benjamin, our co-host, actually is trained in hypnosis.
I am, and hypnosis is a thing that in movies and TV gets misrepresented constantly, to the point that anytime I use it, it usually requires me to have a 35-minute discussion with people about what it is not. So what it is and what it is not. And movies like this one, unfortunately, despite it being a wonderful film, constantly show us things that reinforce the false narrative that in some way, shape, or form, hypnosis is surrendering yourself to the powers of someone else's will. And that is false. What hypnosis is a natural state of mind that exists in all of us. Every one of us has felt it. Every one of us has been in a hypnotic state. It's a state of focused relaxation where your brainwaves have gone from your alpha or beta, where you are typically awake and alert, into theta waves, which allow you to be in a more calm, relaxed state where your brain is more capable of functioning on a subconscious level and is more apt to perceive suggestions and processing. So the way we've all been in a hypnotic state, think about driving home. Every single one of us has had the experience where we were driving and don't remember the last 20 minutes of the trip. But yet somehow we got home safe. Mm-hmm. That is a hypnotic state. Right there. That's a hypnotic state that everyone has been in. But the important thing to remember about that is that all of the processes that keep you safe, engaged, and alert are still on, even if you are checked out into a state of focused relaxation where you're lost in your music, your thoughts, whatever is going on, but yet some part of your brain is still processing the parts that keep you safe and you're able to drive. So let's talk about hypnosis a little bit more here. Let's do the myths. Let's start with that. So with hypnosis, first thing I'm going to dispel, all hypnosis is self-hypnosis. At no time can someone hypnotize you. At no time can someone take control of you via hypnosis. At no time do you surrender yourself to someone else, ever. It is all self-hypnosis. It is all something that someone can help guide you to find that exists within you, that has existed within human beings forever. Does it feel like an altered state sometimes? Yes. But we've all been in those states where we've been able to zone out and focus on something while at the same time tuning out other stimuli because we're in such a focused state. Meditation is an example of a hypnotic state where you have reached a point where you are so focused on what you were thinking about that you have reached a point where you have tuned out the noise going on from the outside world. You have tuned out the other thoughts going on in your mind simultaneously and have entered a state where you're able to focus only on the things you were choosing to. So at no point can someone wave a watch in front of your face and make you cluck like a chicken. This is not a thing. No point can you enter a hypnotic state and be under the control of someone else. So what can happen with it, though, is that if it is something that you want to be in, if it is a state you'd like to be guided to, it can help you get to a place where you are more responsive to suggestions, where you are more apt to consider what someone is saying without actively rejecting it inside your mind. But at no point will you ever divulge secrets you don't want to divulge. At no point would you give away your bank account. At no point would you get up and do things that are weird, take off your clothes, sleep with someone. Any of the stuff that we see in media being done constantly, none of that would ever happen. Because the defense mechanisms that exist within your brain and the limits that you set up structures to will always be there and will be engaged. So at no point will you go any further than you want to. With hypnosis, though, what is interesting about it is that it can be used and is used if anesthesia isn't available. It can be used for surgeries to dissociate body parts away from pain. It can be used by dentists for helping lower blood pressure so that bleeding decreases during surgical procedures for dental work. It can be used in therapy for helping someone get to a place in their mind where, and the way I describe it to people is imagine that there's like your brain is a house. And on the main floor is where the rest of your family is, except in this example, in your house is all the different parts of yourself. And all of those parts are constantly chattering. And each one has an opinion about what's going on, how you did that day, how you're doing in life, and whatever evaluation of the current moment is going on. All those things have voices, and they're chattering constantly, like being in a busy house party or in a house full of family. What hypnosis is like is going into the basement, into your own room, tuning everybody else out, and focusing on your own stuff. So it's a very powerful clinical tool that unfortunately gets misrepresented, and I treat people with it quite often. Even some of the biggest, baddest ass SWAT level guys that you encounter, military, ex-military. I use it with people all the time to help guide them into a step-by-step process that allows you to get into a focused state of relaxation where you can get in a place in your mind that is quiet, that allows you to consider options that you had once tuned out.
And so thank you so much, Ben, for that really good description. So I think I've talked about this before on the podcast, but I'm not sure. So when I saw my first therapist, I was 25 and went into the room and basically told her that I didn't think I'd be able to talk to her because I had been pushing stuff down for such a long time. And she was trained in hypnosis. Mm-hmm. So the first, I probably had like maybe 10 or 15 hypnosis sessions with her. And for me, it was working on trauma. Okay. And kind of like helping me to, similar in some ways to EMDR stuff where you kind of attach positive things. I had an object, I had a place, I had a color, mm-hmm. And I remember everything. Like I remember feeling really calm, but I remember everything that happened. And actually my therapist at the time recorded the sessions so that I could have, I'm not exactly sure why she did that. And I don't think I ever asked her because I was so new. I wasn't in the field yet. I wasn't even thinking about being a therapist.
Oh, yeah, I can answer that.
Okay, good. Because I have no idea. And I think I actually have them somewhere. Like, I think that I kept them. But it was something that really helped me be able to exactly what you said, be able to feel calm enough to be okay processing something. Like, I don't think I would have been able to keep myself out of survival mode in order to process things. So
correct.
It was really helpful. And then after that, the next therapist I saw, I didn't have to do hypnosis therapy to talk to somebody anymore. I was able to, because I had kind of been able to process certain things with her, I was able to just kind of be able to talk about things in a different way.
Yeah, so that reminds me of some other myths and things that I should probably dispel. And before I go for there's different places that will train you in hypnosis, and people can get trained in hypnosis. The one I'm trained in is called ASH, the American Society for Clinical Hypnosis. What makes that particular one different and why I chose it is that they only train licensed health professionals. They do not train entertainers.
Oh.
You are not allowed to do stage hypnosis and be part of that society at all. It is the first and foremost disqualifier other than not having a clinical license. So you must be a licensed provider in a healthcare field in order to get trained by them.
You can't be in the League of Magicians.
No,
or
you
whatever
cannot.
it is that Job is a part of in Arrested Development.
The Hypnotist Guild? Yeah. Yeah, and they also charge a reasonable amount. The Hypnotist Guild will charge you something like $4,000 to train you in hypnosis, which is unreasonable and outrageous. But it's a 5-day training that you do. You go for a weekend for the first level. There's 3 levels. But anybody who's been through the first level can do hypnosis with people, and then they offer a certification process just like anybody else. But some of the things that people think about hypnosis, am I going to sleep? No, you are not going to sleep. Will I know what's happening? Yes. Will I be in control of what's happening? Yes. Will I be aware of what's going on with my body, with my mind, with my thoughts at all times? Yes. At no point in time do you ever lose time, your perception of time might change a little bit when you're under that, but you're not ever going to not know what happened or where you were or what you're seeing or what imagery you're being guided through. And the purpose of recording them is that being hypnotized and reaching that place of focus relaxation is a skill. You need to build a neural pathway to it. So the more times you do it, the easier it becomes to find your way back to that place of hypnosis. So one of the reasons why we record things, and I have people now, I have people that have recording devices with them all the time. I have people record sessions on their cell phones so that if they want to listen to them to relax before bed or when they're doing something else, that they can listen to it and work on enhancing the what we call ego development that can come with it, ego enhancement. That can come with it, as well as learning to practice the relaxation on their own so that they can get to that state of calm. Because in the work of Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, who wrote the book, The Body Keeps the Score, comes up with a very simple statement that I wish more people understood. I wish I was taught in grad school, and for some reason this word was new to me as a professional, 10 years in, but it's interoception, which is what Hannah's talking about. You cannot heal trauma with body tension, because what heals trauma is interoception, which the definition of that is being able to sit in a traumatic memory with a calm body, with focused attention on calm, relaxed body. Once you reach that state, that allows you to reprocess trauma. And that's what one of the things that EMDR and other trauma therapies do, is help produce a state of interoception where you can recognize in the present that you are calm and you can reprocess the trauma in a safe spot, because you are no longer dissociating into the past and recognizing that you are unsafe now and letting that come into the future. You're able to pair safe now with distressing memory. Oh. Mm-hmm. That is what heals trauma, period. Mm-hmm. Nothing else. And so hypnosis can be used for that. I personally do not use hypnosis to explore trauma. I do not use it to explore past memories. I use it only for ego strengthening, relaxation, and helping people refine confidence or commitment to things they already want to do. like losing weight, that they can't get past the bad behaviors. They can't get themselves started. I use to help strengthen their resolve for that by giving them suggestions that that's what they want to do. And one of the ways that you get client buy-in, and part of the Ash Train method, is that you never stray from what you talked about and agreed upon would be talked about prior to entering the hypnotic state with the client. So if we're going to talk about working on weight loss or working on smoking or working on being able to stand up for myself or believe that I'm a good enough person that I deserve to leave this douchebag. Any of these things. Like finding that ego strength where you stop beating yourself down and believing the bullshit people have told you about yourself, and finding a way to connect again to the parts of you that feel good about being you. It helps to get there without the barriers of all those negative voices chattering inside your head telling you you're not good enough or you don't deserve that. So those are the ways it can be used. That's how I use it.
So I think one good point to bring up is the reason why Hannah and I are being so quiet is this is a good example of just because we're all therapists doesn't mean we know everything that can be done in therapy. Hannah's had personal experience, and I've had no experience, personal or professional, with hypnosis. So even in me watching this movie, I wasn't sure what was real and what was bullshit. And so in this movie, what we see, and I'm bringing this up to ping this off of you, Ben.
Sure.
Is we see she uses, I think one of the most well-known visuals of this movie is that she uses the teacup and the sound of the spoon along the rim as a kind of what you were saying, like the watch going in front of your face kind of thing.
The word for that would be induction.
Induction. Okay. So is that realistic?
Yes.
Okay, so that isn't BS.
No.
I guess my assumption would be, and if you could clear this up, is, though, that her doing that unprovoked, because she does that sneakily, where he's not... Well, she does kind of bring up, do you want to be hypnotized for smoking or to quit smoking?
And he says no.
Yeah, he says no. So...
She just does it.
But I guess the point I'm making is that...
Which you can't do.
Yeah,
Nope.
Can you hypnotize someone when they're not ready?
No.
No. Okay, so that's BS. And then two... where it almost seems like kind of what you're saying, where the myth that hypnosis can control you. You can tell in the superb acting that he does in that scene that he is talking almost against his will, which is why his facial expressions, even though he's crying, don't quite match what he's saying. It's like it's being pulled out from him through his mouth.
So basically everything that happens in the hypnosis scenes in this movie, except for the induction, are pretty much bullshit.
Okay. Yes.
I'll start with that. Sometimes the experience of sinking into something or allowing yourself to float or kind of feeling that, or allowing things to come to your mind that you've been blocking or you haven't focused on, that in a sense can be done. But the experience of being fully sinking through the chair and being trapped in that, I forgot what the word they use.
Sunken place,
the
where
sunken
you're
place.
seeing out like a TV.
Right. Mm-hmm. You can walk people into kind of a state where they feel for me, whenever I go through an induction process, I almost feel like that feeling you get when you suddenly go underwater. When I finally let go and reach that hypnotic state, I feel myself pulling away. I can just kind of go whoosh, and then it's quiet. It enters that deep underwater state. When you go underwater, you hear all the noise, and you go underwater, and it's immediately quiet, and you pull away. Mm-hmm. It's like that for me, and I'm quite susceptible to it. There's some disagreement on whether some people are just more susceptible to it, or it has more to do with kind of willingness and than natural ability to get there. But some people, regardless of the agreement or disagreement, are more susceptible to it than others.
And I would also imagine, just hearing you talk about it, because this is the most I've ever heard you speak about hypnosis, in a instructional way, is he's in such a clear state of distress. It seems like his distress would go exactly against being able to be hypnotized.
Yes.
Because he's screaming as he's being pulled into the sunken place and fighting and reaching and trying to scrapple back up.
Right.
And so it sounds like that in itself would cancel out
the
actual act of being hypnotized.
He wouldn't let himself go.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
He wouldn't find that. So what what is real is that the induction methods can be done a number of ways. Most are done through eye exhaustion, which is why that happens to us. Highway hypnosis happens to us because you are in a constant state of eye exhaustion because you are constantly scanning. And why we get fucked up by the windshield wipers when they are going, because it creates a constant state of focal point for our senses to go on, and our eyes are tracking it as it goes back and forth, which is why when those are going, we are in a particular risk of being in highway hypnosis.
Interesting.
Because much of it is done through eye exhaustion, which is where like the whole follow the watch kind of thing comes from, like Mad Hatter and Batman does, like with the watch or the spiral. Like that kind of stuff is, it can be used for eye exhaustion. Because if you get someone's eyes exhausted, you have them focus on a fixed point for long enough, they start fading out and their consciousness loses some of the resistance it had to things.
Okay.
And that is part of it. You can also do it through deep breathing. You can do it through an eye roll, which induces eye exhaustion really quick, which is where you have someone roll their eyes all the way up to follow your fingers and then down quickly. And then magnet fingers is another one of my favorites, where you have people kind of interlace their fingers and then hold their first two fingers apart from each other and focus on that gap. And then they get inducted by the time the fingers touch, because you cannot keep your fingers apart.
Oh, that's weird.
You cannot keep your fingers apart. You can't do it. And by introducing an impossible task for you to focus on, I just freaked Brittany the fuck out.
I just tried it, and he's right, guys.
But by having people fixate on that, then you create a hypnotic state.
It's creepy.
That's not, though.
It's just interesting.
Yeah, it's not creepy. It is fascinating. But when you learn that it's you, it's just you going into a state that exists within you. So
I think maybe a point to make to everybody then is like, no person trained hypnosis can just like roll up on you and start tingling-ing on a coffee cup, and then you're just like can't remember what happened.
No,
like 3 hours later.
None of that is right. I mean, I think we just used. I know that I was laying down. There was definitely a countdown that we did. I can't exactly remember it right now because it's been such a long time that I've done it. But now I really want to listen to them. I'm sure she told me that at some point that's why she was recording them for me. But I feel like that makes a lot of sense. But I remember, the only thing that I remember really clearly the first time that was kind of confusing just in general was because I had my eyes closed and I started to cry really hard. Like as soon as I went under, I was like, I was full on sobbing with my eyes closed, which felt really weird. I didn't know that you could do that. But then like understanding what I understand now about, I totally know why that happened. But at the same time, it didn't feel like I didn't feel scared, you know, like I didn't feel worried or anxious about what was she going to think about me crying like this. Like it was all just kind of like, oh, I'm crying really hard.
Correct. It got you out of that place. It got you into the basement where you were no longer listening to the other voices of yourself, the other parts of yourself criticizing the actions you were taking in the moment, and were able to focus only on where you are and what you're doing. It's like you have Rafiki in your head. Yoda. Sorry, Yoda. God damn it. Having Yoda in your head, never his mind on where he is, what he is doing, like whacking you with a stick. Like you just are able to get into that space where you are just calm, and it's incredibly powerful to be in that state, to realize that you are your own worst critic, not anybody else. Not other. You may have internalized other people's voices, but it gets you a place where you can turn that shit off.
Yeah. It kind of sounds like this movie is like the whole polar opposite of actually what it really looks like.
Correct.
To be hypnotized.
And where her induction technique would work is that circling the cup, making that very deliberate, particular sound that she keeps drawing his attention to. Just focus on that. Notice when you hear the sound of the cup. And then when she does like kind of the scene where she's walking him back into his trauma, the way she's doing that is more like a legitimate hypnotic technique, except he would need to be willing
Yeah.
to go there and open to being that vulnerable to himself.
Yeah.
Not to her, to himself. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it can be an issue with clients of being that vulnerable with anybody.
Yeah.
Especially yourself, but with another person present, that can be a lot, particularly with what he experienced. But the focus point where she's having him do that would be a legitimate technique. It'd be similar to what monks do with the bowls where they make the sound.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
But
I know what you mean.
The meditation bowls.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, those things, it's similar because it's allowing a focus point for your attention. And what she did there, like I said, would be fairly similar to what would happen of going, can you remember the rain? Can you notice that? Can you remember what you saw? But the thing with hypnosis is what the feedback you're generally getting from the therapist is never anything other than the therapist providing their observations of what's going on with your body back to you that you may not have been in tune with.
Okay.
Like, one of the things that I use it for chronic pain a lot. And it's extremely, that's because when I got trained, most of the people in my training were MDs. So a few were dentists and some nurses, and there were a few therapists too, but probably 65% were MDs.
No shit.
No shit. MDs.
Wow.
And what you can do with that is that just like stress, as I realized that after like sitting in on the lunch and learn with the MDs rather than going with the therapist, because I wanted to hear how they use it, is that anxiety and chronic pain are really not a lot different. In both cases, they are omnipresent. In some situations, when your mind is somewhere else, focused deliberately on something else, you can tune it out. Like, why can the grandmother who's watching her grandbaby be the first one go to college, who can't hardly walk or has chronic pain, sit in bleachers or on hard metal chairs in a high school for 3 hours during that ceremony, but yet usually can't walk well? Why can she do that day? Because she is so focused and determined on that one thing and seeing that thing that she is that day able to tune all that shit out. She may feel it for the next couple days, but in those moments, she can tune all that out because her focus attention is on that. So how do you create or replicate that state deliberately? Mm-hmm. And we use like a remote technique for that. So like I have people walk down into relaxation and then imagine having a remote. And with chronic pain, the thing you do is you steer into the skid. You steer into it. So you turn up the pain, because turning it down creates anxiety, which creates tension, which makes it worse. Because when you're trying to escape from chronic pain, the only thing on your mind is making the pain stop now and realizing that you can't. And the same is true with chronic anxiety. You can't stop the worry when it's chronic. It's always there. It's always chattering. Pain and anxiety are the same. So what it does is it helps you steer into that. You turn it up first so that you can regain control by recognizing, okay, if I can turn it up, that means I can turn it down. But if I turn it down and fail, that means I'm failing, I'm doomed, I'm stuck to feel this way for the whole day, for the whole year, forever. Mm-hmm. And then I can't get out of it, and then you get tight, and you get tense, and you get distressed. Whereas the other way, you turn it up, and you reach a point where you get control of it again. And so what I do with people is have them, imagine they have a remote, and they turn it up. And you slowly turn up the levels of anxiety to the point that they can barely tolerate it, whatever that is. And as they're doing that, they have walked them fully into relaxation. And I go, notice your breathing increasing. Notice your heart rate increasing. And as I'm doing this, I'm only giving them the feedback of what I'm seeing, because as I'm having them increase their stress level, I can physically see their heart beating faster. I can see their breathing change. I can see their shoulders climbing up into their ears. And as I have them draw their attention to that, while also noticing that despite being uncomfortable, they are still okay. Mm-hmm. And then have them immediately walk it down once they've been turning it up and see how fast they can regain control. And it works almost invariably.
Interesting.
So the things it can be used for and the ways it's done and the things we see her do to bring him into it, there's a close to real and how she did it, but the caveats of this movie are that he would need to want to go there. He would need to want that. He would need to want to be in that state, to want to be vulnerable, and he is not open to that. He is not comfortable with them. There is no fucking way he would ever get to that state in that house with those people because he does not trust them, and they are obviously, at minimum, at this point in the movie, fucking racists.
Or nonsense people, yes. For sure. And I think this is a good example, which we've talked about on the podcast before, of because this is a movie, and in this case, a scary movie, they're taking something real and subverting it to make it scary. So they're taking the roots of hypnosis, but they're changing it up in a way that's obviously scary.
Right.
Someone, tricking you into taking over your body and taking over your mind. Because also the parts of it where hypnosis are used in this movie or referenced is the idea that when these... I know I said black men before, but it's black man and black women because there's a black woman who's taken over. When they're taken over, they're still kind of in there. But, I don't know if it's, continued hypnosis is, keeping them dormant while...
Yes.
The white brain, for lack of a better, the Caucasian brain is, in there, too. As, the dominant thing. I didn't quite understand that part of the movie, to be quite honest, when they describe that. It sounds like scary movie, hullabaloo.
Yeah, it does. I don't feel
like
fake
it's movie logic.
Yes, that's a narrative device, basically. Yeah. It's she creates a plant word, a trigger word for him that allows her to instantly regain control of him.
Yeah.
Well, no, not a thing.
That's not a thing.
That's not a thing.
That's something that's used a lot when hypnosis is talked about in fiction.
People are
is
afraid
that
of
you
it.
can just trigger word somebody, and then they will start acting like a chicken, or in this example, go to the sunken place. And then also, I think the idea that people, then he flashes the camera in these people's eyes, and then they wake up out of it, which is the inverse of that idea. That then there's also you snap your fingers, or you say a certain word, and you snap back into reality.
Yeah.
So yes, and that's where it's partial truth. If you were to... Because people can be hypnotized with their eyes open. That's the thing. They can open their eyes when they're under a hypnotic state before they've been walked back up into regular levels of consciousness. That can happen. Mm-hmm. But if something were to be introduced, like the flash of a camera, to redraw your attention out of that state and back into the present, that would cause you to come out of the hypnotic state.
Okay. But I would imagine you can't stay in that constant hypnotic state that they're alluding to in the movie.
No.
Yeah.
Where they can keep them down until they give them the trigger to wake up. No. At no point can you, if you wanted to come out of a hypnotic state, the second you want to come out of it, you come out of it.
Okay.
At no point, if there were a fire in the house, unless you are one of those monks who's lighting themselves on fire in Vietnam under protest.
Yeah.
Those people have deliberately entered a state of mind where they are focusing on not being in pain and dissociating out of it. But the minute you wanted to be out of that state, you would be.
So what we're telling our listeners to take away from this episode, if nothing else, is that you can't be hypnotized against your will. You don't have to worry about that. No one's gonna when I count to 3, you're gonna bada bada ba.
No.
Okay.
That's all nonsense. What I can do is I do implant things for people, but again, it's only things that they want. With the remote, one of the things that I do with them is I have them imagine putting it in their pocket, and it's fascinating when they're really under, they'll move their hand and put it on their pocket like they're doing it, because I tell them that they can if they want to, not that they have to. It's an invitation, not a command.
Oh, okay.
If you'd like to put your hand on your pocket where you put the remote, you can, and then I want you to remember that anytime you touch that pocket and need that remote, that you'll remember that it's there, that it's a part of you, that it was always a part of you, and you can use it at any time you want. So you can help create plants by having them touch physical parts. One of the things we often do is imagine getting a backpack and putting the things from a room that makes you feel good about yourself in that bag, and then you can touch your shoulders to remember the weight of the bag and remember what's in it.
Aw.
So it'd be as simple as creating a plant, but there's no way the stuff we see in show hypnosis, the people who get on that stage in the first fucking place.
Oh, they're wanting to be hypnotized.
Are wanting to be hypnotized.
That's a good point.
Would already do all of that shit that they're doing anyway. They might just need to be given permission to do it, but none.
Oh, yeah.
Being drunk, I only do stuff like that when I'm drunk. But if you have some kind of thing in your like allowing you to reach a relaxed state where you're not thinking about all of the consequences or the judgments that are going on in your head alone, let alone what you perceive from other people, you might act as like, in a more silly way with less restraint. People who do that shit in stage hypnosis, when you see it, would do it anyway under the right conditions.
Yeah.
Hypnosis just helped produce the right conditions.
Okay.
But someone who would not ever do that stuff ever and would be mortified to cluck like a chicken in front of other people would never cluck like a chicken in front of people. But if someone wanted to do that or wanted to be silly for a laugh or would do things for a laugh, that person would. And that's why they kick people off the stage when they pick that up. They go, this person's not into it. Mm-hmm. So it just has to leave. You always see it. They start with like 20 people and then get down to like 10 or 8 because they're weeding people out who aren't fully going.
That's a good point. Well, all right. So that was kind of in-depth. Well, thank you for all that, Ben.
You're welcome.
I know we basically told him before we started recording, like, we're just going to lean back, the two of us, and let you take this over, Ben. Mm-hmm. Okay, so hypnosis, that is kind of the big chunk that's more of like the quote-unquote like therapy piece that's demonstrated in this movie. Because she's a psychiatrist. That's her title, right?
I think they say that she's a psychiatrist.
Okay.
I think that is correct.
So the next big thing we want to talk about is sort of, well, racism, but sort of like the spectrum of racism that we see in this movie. And by that we mean that what is really interesting about this movie, which was an obvious choice that Jordan Peele made, was that this family is presented as like a liberal, quote unquote, woke, progressive family, and not like a old school Republican redneck family. And this movie shows that like there's still racism that's there. Racism doesn't just look like one thing. Racism looks like many things. Yes. And so this movie more shows like that version of it. And by that we mean like microaggressions, sort of the kind of people that say, I don't see color, and like, shit like that. And that are just kind of just like blind to like racial differences and how to create spaces, like safe spaces for people of color in their life. And also like how gaslighting is demonstrated between like more specifically the girlfriend and our main character, Chris. So when we talk about the interracial relationship between, what is her name? The girlfriend.
Rose. He calls her Rosie.
Yeah. Rose and Chris we know that she's a villain. One of the biggest turns in this movie is when she has the keys.
Right.
And you realize that she's bad, and it's like, oh my God. But we're going to talk about this as if that wasn't part of it, as if she was just like his well-meaning, well, quote unquote, well-meaning white girlfriend bringing him home to meet her white family.
Right. Spoiler alert.
Because the things that she does is stuff that I've seen people do and seen people say, not knowing what they're talking about, like just not realizing what they're doing, just because they're ignorant, probably because they're in their own bubble of whiteness or whatever. So when we say microaggressions, the definition of a microaggression is like brief and commonplace daily verbal or behavioral indignities, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative attitudes towards stigmatized or culturally marginalized groups. So it was coined in 1970 by a Harvard professor, Chester M. Pierce, to describe the insults and dismissals that he would regularly witness between non-Black Americans inflicting on African Americans. So that's like the tidy definition of it. And the way we kind of see it in this movie is, well, there's a lot of examples of it. I think that's kind of the point of a lot of the interactions.
Right. It's definitely the point of the interactions.
Yeah.
We see it, and it starts slow, and it starts little by little, and the more the white people get comfortable with him being around, and the more he doesn't react and has to maintain an air of politeness to dismiss kind of the transgressions that they're doing, it starts to transform from microaggressions to straight outright racism.
Yes. So, I mean, like, I would say that, well, let me think. Like, there's the blatant ones. That's when he's at that, like, picnic, which is really him being, like, checked out by all the potential buyers.
Auctioned.
Yes.
It's him being auctioned.
Yeah. And so when, like, they're saying, like, being Black is trendy now, like, saying things that, like, almost people would say, like, you'd almost want to put as, like, quote-unquote positive racism, like giving compliments based on his ethnicity. Like, it's so cool to be Black. you know, you guys, like, black people are so good at sports, like, you know, you must, you know, like shit like that. When people say shit like that,
You don't even sound black.
dressing it up as a compliment.
You're the whitest
yes.
black person I know.
Yeah.
If I heard your voice, I wouldn't even known you were black.
Yeah.
That kind of shit.
Yeah. And so a lot of those weird complimentary microaggressions in that scene.
Yeah, a lot.
Yeah. Like other versions of, I think a good version of it, which we kind of split up, but I guess now that I'm rereading the definition of microaggressions, the gaslighting that Rose does to him a lot, like several times in the movie, he tries to have sort of a blunt conversation with her about like the fact that they're in an interracial relationship. Like he's like, maybe, I think her name's, is it Georgina or Georgia? Georgina. She unplugged my phone maybe because she has a problem with, you know, us dating. He's trying to say like, can we be real? Like maybe as a black woman, she has a problem with seeing a white girl and a black man dating. And she's like, oh, and she makes it into a joke. She does that several times during the movie. She'll like write him off, be like, oh, do you think that she just thinks like you're the hottest, like you're so hot or whatever? And like the same thing when he tries to bring up like George, the gardener, being aggressive towards him and being like, do you think it's because he's into you? Like she does the same thing where he's trying to have a real conversation with her about race and about the racial component of their relationship, and she is like writing him off.
Right, which, you know, as we move through the plot of this movie, first, like what Jordan Peele did that was so masterful with this is we just perceive it as her being microaggressive.
Yeah.
We don't know that what's actually happening is that it's full-blown gaslighting.
Yes.
Because she's trying to make him seem like he's crazy for perceiving what he is, that he's being ridiculous, that it's all him, that his perceptions are all off, which is what gaslighting is making someone think that they are perceiving things wrong and their senses are wrong, so they ignore them so that they can be manipulated. That is what gaslighting is.
And so the straight up gaslighting part, the trying to make him crazy, feel like he's crazy part, that is more like the horror element, like trying to get him to not trust his own mind and like get him into this uneasy place so that they can keep taking advantage of him. But I would say like the non-horror movie version of that is like, my assumption would be is she's so uncomfortable with the concept of talking about the interracial part of the relationship that she's just dismissing it because she's not even probably cognizant of like how uncomfortable that makes her. Like you see over the course of this movie, like if we're going to take her as like not a villain, as just like a straight up character, like the discomfort she feels really about bringing any attention to the racial differences. Like in the beginning when he says, did you tell him that I'm black? And she says, oh yeah, I'm going to tell him I'm going to bring over my black boyfriend. When she, you know, when she tries to make a whole thing about it. And like her continuing to dismiss him trying to like be real with her. Like it's like when people say, I don't see color. It's like, but that's not true. And by us not talking about it, that in itself is racist and aggressive.
And
and a violent act against him.
It's a marginalization there. It's a marginalization of someone's feelings and the experience they have of being a person that is not part of whatever in-group it is. And it, you know, generally it can be race, or it can be a religion or any other number of things that microaggressions can apply to, sexuality. But basically, whatever reason you're not part of the in-group that you're about to enter, you're an outsider of dismissing someone's feelings about being part of that out-group is a microaggression, period. And it's something that we all need to recognize and stop, is that we need to start listening to people when they are talking about their experience of being a part of a different group than the one in which they are joining. It is not a homogenous society. We are not homogenized. We are very much into tribalism as human beings. And it's important to recognize that other people's experience of things is going to be different than yours, period.
And in those moments too, like, you can tell he's having feelings. Like he's in like all those, even like he's being very vulnerable with her by bringing it up. You can tell that, like, even like in the beginning scene when he says, you tell them that I'm black, you can tell that he's making a very pointed choice to have this conversation and that he's like opening up a door. And every time he does that and like is allowing himself to be vulnerable with her, she's like quite literally laughs at him.
Yeah, almost every
single
time. Yeah.
Trying to keep it at this very like this air of levity about it, which is so invalidating.
Yeah, that's a great word. She invalidates his experience constantly. And what makes it worse is that what people don't realize is that even if you're trying to reassure people that what they're walking into won't be the thing that they're afraid of it is, which is bullshit because you don't know that and you're not inside their mind. You can't do that. That's not a thing, but people try anyway to try to think they're soothing someone, is when you're doing that, you're invalidating every other experience they've had throughout their entire fucking life where it's been true. Yeah. And you know nothing about because you are not that.
Yeah. Like, is she the first white girl he's ever dated? Did he go to, to another girlfriend's house and, and it was a really bad experience or a really good experience because they did preempt it. You know what I mean? Like, she's not taking into account his true anxieties and feelings about this, because in a real world example, I would assume it's because she's too uncomfortable confronting it, or she's raised, which it also, this is how this family is presented too, which is part of the humor of it, is that she, like, being raised in a family where, like, it's not a big deal. Like, we don't, like, everyone's just, people are people, like, like hyper progressive bullshit where
keyword bullshit.
Yes. Where it feels like racist to talk about it at all. And I think, like, something I'm even learning right now is we're all kind of like, well, as a white person, we're all kind of like waking up a little bit more in America, is not talking about it is bad. You know what I mean? I think we were all sort of raised like in the 90s and like the early 2000s of like, let's not make it a thing. Like, you know what I mean? Like, let's all like just treat everyone like human beings. And like, that is not helpful, because exactly what you're saying, Ben, is you're not helping create a safe space for him where you're talking about like what's true for him and like how to prep him for going to like the parents' house and what that could look like. And maybe having like, if you're really uncomfortable, like we can go do this instead, like signalings almost to each other. Like if something like going, like having him go to that big picnic thing or whatever that was, like the auction thing, like he was, obviously we know now why, but he was being so preyed upon. But like, that's not something that would not happen in like a real world example, where they're all weirdly doting on him and like not giving him opportunity to escape from that.
And also not giving him an opportunity to really express himself. I mean, like, he's being barraged with questions, but not really asked anything honest.
And then she does the thing.
Because, and we know why. I mean, like, there's a reason. But, like, at the same time, it's just that sense of, like, asking someone something and then not really caring what they have to say, or not being willing to listen, or not even asking a question that makes any fucking sense in the first place.
And then she does the secondary thing, which is also very horrible, of being pissed about it when it's just the two of them.
Yeah.
Not standing up for him in the moment, really, but then performing outrage after the fact, and then putting him in the position of having to swallow her feelings because she's upset with how he was treated. So then she's asking emotional labor of him as the black person who was subjected to all of it.
Which is an important point to bring up, that in any situation with any partner or friend or person in your life, that the minute that you have to put them in a position where they have to defend their feelings, or they have to defend or qualify your feelings about their experience, you are taking away from them their ability to have and be valid in their own experience. That is what we need to all be better at. You need to shut up and listen at that point. And yeah, the feelings are uncomfortable. They are uncomfortable. But without uncomfortability, there is no change. We must stop avoiding the uncomfortable feelings and sit in them and notice them. Mm-hmm. And I think that what we see is that people, like we see with her when you're talking about this, is that when she gets uncomfortable, it goes back onto him to solve her problem instead of her solving his problem.
Yeah.
Because now he's worried about her feeling and she's having a feeling because he had a feeling, and that's bullshit.
Like, she's the one getting all worked up and he's just sitting in bed and he's just like, like, he's comfort. I think you always have to be careful when you put the people in your life in the position where they end up having to comfort you about something they're experiencing because it's making you feel bad. And that's also like a big reason why with clients I work with, why they won't always disclose how they're truly doing to like the people in their life, because they're like, I don't want it to be a situation where then they feel really bad and then I'm like apologizing to them about my experience bringing up bad feelings for them. Because for her, if she truly was like, I know it's all performance, but if she was truly like trying to be there for him about that, it could have been like, hey, her in a neutral way saying, hey, I noticed all these things happening. How are you doing? What do you need from me? what could I have done differently? Like almost like more like debriefing and less like ranting and raving so that she can feel like she gets it, quote unquote. And then he's not getting anything. What I noticed with that is he's not getting anything from her showing all the feeling.
And he's having to shut down his own response.
Yeah.
Which you notice, like as soon as she starts acting bananas, he closes right down. He's like, oh, you know what? I'm good. I'm fine. I don't need to talk about this anymore. Like, and that response is someone who is now has to protect themselves from you because you couldn't give them the space that they needed to talk about whatever was going on, to talk about their own experience that you are now projecting onto.
Mm-hmm. Ugh.
It's heavy. And it's so important to realize that, especially as Midwesterners, we are programmed to be fine. We're programmed to say and be fine. The homeostasis state we're supposed to be at is fine. How are you? I'm fine. How are you? Immediately taking attention back off yourself and placing it on the other person. It's important to recognize that Americans in general, we have this subconscious idea that comes from forgetting that the people who founded our country, at least the ones who colonized it, were so uptight, in the words of Robin Williams, that the English said, get the fuck out. Like, they were so uptight that the English told them to get the fuck out. And, like, there's so much of that has penetrated our culture that people they consider it impolite to make other people feel uncomfortable. And people who are having a feeling about whatever they are experiencing from being part of the out group then feel guilty that they made someone else have a feeling by having their feeling, and they seek to shut it down just like he did. But that then creates this system where people who are having feelings are feeling internal pressure, let alone external pressure, to shut down their own feelings, not feel them, not experience them. And all feelings are biological impulses that we like to ignore and like to pretend are not part of our biology. And we like to pretend that there's something that we can control. They're a matter of choice. Mm-hmm. And that's fucking false. Like, one of the things that I have to remind people, a lot of people, that you see are religious, and as a non-religious person, I have to find a way to engage religious and non-religious people on the same point. But basically, regardless of whichever way you believe we were created, whether that we were created by an intelligent being or Big Bang and evolution, however you believe, it doesn't matter. The same point that we can agree on is everything in our body has a function. Everything in our body has a function. Your gallbladder has a function. Your small intestine has a function. Your brain has a function. And the neurochemical impulses that produce feelings have a purpose. And the purpose is not so that you fucking ignore them and do nothing about them. The purpose is to help you code and process the situations you are experiencing in your brain so that you then have a reference point on what to do with them and what to do to change them. They are designed to produce either happiness and pleasurable feelings to keep you doing that, or discomfort and unpleasurable feelings so that you find a way to stop doing that and recognize that that is not okay. And that is something that this concept of Midwestern fine and just the American experience in general tend to like to take away from people. And we see that over and over happening on extra levels to people of color and people of outgroups because they aren't allowed by societal standards to process their own feeling, because that is wrong. You're not supposed to have a feeling. You're supposed to be able to outthink feelings, and you can't. Mm-hmm. You cannot negotiate with feelings. It cannot be done. You have to feel them, and the more you push them down, the more explosion happens later when they burst out of you.
And go ahead, Hannah.
And I was just thinking about, that's a really good point, Ben. I feel like the amount of times I talk to clients right now about your feelings are valid. Like, you are having a feeling for a reason, and that is okay. How you deal with it and the behavior that you have based on the feeling that you're having, that in some ways, that is a choice.
Right. That is a different discussion.
That is something different. But every feeling you have is valid. Your body is responding. Your brain is responding to something. And there's no... So people trying to invalidate you are just, maybe they really just are uncomfortable. I don't fucking know. But what I do think is What I do think is that I feel like hearing, as we're talking about this, thinking about how the people feeling uncomfortable about talking about hard things. The thing is, those hard things are still happening.
Yeah.
Yep.
And just
Yeah.
because you're not talking about it does not stop it from happening. So the people in your life that you care about, and especially in this case, people of color, they're already thinking about it and dealing with it on a regular basis on their own. So not talking about it, you're not doing them any fucking favors by not wanting to talk about it, or you feel uncomfortable, or whatever the fuck it is, because it's something that's we already have to deal with on a regular basis, and in almost every interaction that we have, of feeling and seeing people respond to what we look like versus anything else about us. So whoever you're trying to shield, it doesn't work. It's not working. Quit doing it. Talking about it, no matter how uncomfortable it may make you, is part of how we stop pretending like everything is fine.
Well, I mean, that's privilege, right? Like, she has the privilege. The girlfriend Rose has the privilege of not talking about this.
Absolutely.
Writing off the
Absolutely.
conversations about your interracial relationship, blowing it off. And she's not recognizing that he is already feeling the effects of this relationship. He can't walk away from it, like the racial piece of it.
Right, because when you're a person of color, we can't take off our skin. We can't take off our skin.
Yes.
It's not going to stop.
Yeah.
It's not going to stop for any reason. Like it, and people aren't going to just, it's this year, so people should be whatever. That's not a fucking thing, man.
Nope.
Like you still are, different from other people.
And I think going back to sort of to like the denial of discomfort sort of big conversation is what we also see, because I wrote that in my notes. I put, people are stuck in the denial stage of grief. And what I mean by that is, like, the whole point of, like, other than white supremacy, the whole point of, like, the auction and these white people taking on these black bodies, these black people that are taking over their bodies, is because they are going through something where they're feeling uncomfortable. I am dying. I am going blind. I don't think I'm as hot or as cool as I was in the 60s. I don't know. But, like, they're all feeling the discomfort of a change within their supremacy, basically. And instead of acknowledging that, and whatever grief feelings come with, legit feelings go with, like, going blind, being sick and dying, instead of dealing with that, they're going to shut those feelings down, problem solve those feelings by taking over the literal lives of black people. And so that is a whole, like, this, that is like the lofty part of, like, all this shit too, is like, if we would just dive into the discomfort and also just acknowledge, like, privilege has its limitations, even as a white person. Like, you can still get sick. You can still not be hot, or maybe a woman or a black person will get the job you thought you were going to have. Blah, 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 blah. Like, you would just have to deal with that feeling instead of trying to make it go away or shove it down by making it someone else's problem. Quite literally in this movie.
Yes.
And that's the more intense racism when we say the spectrum of racism in this movie. I mean, this movie goes all the way from progressive microaggressions to straight up white supremacy and slave auctioning.
And we see that, like, particularly once we realize the villain turn of Rose, when she reveals herself, we see that happen when she's, like, basically taunting him of, like, even if you escape, we can tell the police that this or that, and who are they going to believe?
Yep.
And he knows she's right. And that is the point where we see the most despair in his face.
Yeah.
When he realizes that he knows she's right. After he thinks he's going to escape, when the groundskeeper ends up, like, regaining part of himself and shooting her and then himself to escape. We see the most intense despair. And I encourage everybody to watch the alternate ending of this, because in the alternate ending, you see that that's exactly what happens. He's found a African-American man in the middle of a rich white area where everybody's dead, the house is on fire, and he's got blood on his hands. And even though he was a total victim there, he has no way to prove it, and he's in jail.
Yeah.
Because the police showed up.
Which is what I thought was going to happen. The first time I saw this movie, my whole body tensed because when those police lights came down the street, and thank God it was his friend, my whole body clenched up because I was like, oh shit, I know where this is going to go. And I think I heard somewhere, that I could be totally wrong, so message us if I'm wrong and correct us. I think that was the original ending, the one you just talked about, but they screened it for audiences, and it was such a fucking bummer. The audiences were like, we need him to win. We can't deal with this. And which I understand, because that's more of a real ending, the alternative one.
Yeah, it is. Absolutely.
That's an uncomfortable moment. Like I liked the alternate ending far better. I mean, I understand like cinematically why it needed to be the other thing, but the movie as it was as a statement, what it was doing, like having it end the way he originally intended to do was much more like the Twilight Zone kind of feel, which he now runs the Twilight Zone. So I'm sure that's where the inspiration came. It was much more Twilight Zone, much more Black Mirror, like the original Twilight Zone, where the one where the guy all he wants to do is like be alone with his books and have everybody gone.
Oh,
and
the
breaks
little boy?
And no. In the Twilight Zone, the original one, there's this one. I think it's the first episode, or maybe this one of the early ones. But this dude wants nothing more than to have everyone gone and leave him alone, so that he can be alone and read his books.
Yeah.
And he gets his wish, but he breaks his glasses.
Well, I know Jordan Peele is heavily influenced by Hitchcock, and you can definitely see that. This is more like final thoughts, but like, and Hitchcock will do those very like bummer, just kind of like, oh shit endings.
Yep.
And so that does make sense to me why he'd been more inclined to that ending, on top of trying to make a statement, obviously. So I don't know, is there any more part of this subject we want to dive into? We talked about this.
I think we covered it.
And there's more to it. I'm sure people have written dissertations about this movie.
I would imagine.
We're barely scratching the surface of the surface of the surface on this.
Yeah,
because this movie is kind of a manifesto about this stuff. So the next part we just want to touch upon, because we know we talk about it like almost every episode, is trauma. Just because it's very clear over the course of this movie that he is someone who has a heavily traumatized past. He's an orphan. He lost his mom when he was 11. His dad, I think he said, was never in the picture. And it's clearly a memory that he is very vulnerable about, obviously. Like when the mom makes him talk about it, he gets so upset. And then I feel so, when he finally tells Rose, and I'm like, oh, you're giving your heart to this villain. But anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think rather than like get into a full discussion of what trauma is, because I will harp on that all day, because basically I've come to the realization that basically everything that is that it brings someone to therapy is trauma. Fight me. Like it's like the 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon. If we get into a discussion about what's anxiety, what's this, I will bring it back to trauma every time. I guarantee it.
Yeah.
I will find it. And I will treat it.
And it's interesting because people are not comfortable with that word.
Nope.
No, I have a lot like that's trauma.
Pointing that out or saying, and like, it's okay if you're not comfortable, but that is an example of a traumatic experience.
Correct. It does not have to be PTSD.
That is a traumatic event. That is something that sounds like a traumatic thing. Like, yeah. Anyway, I just wanted to point that out.
But the way, in talking about it in the framework of this movie, the fact that he has a highly traumatizing past, like big T trauma, like of being like alone in his house for a long time before like his mom passing away, pretty intense, like very vivid, capital T trauma memory, is that
he was alone for like 2 weeks, right?
I can't remember, even though I just watched it last night. But the point of that is that I'm assuming that when Rose picked him, she figured that out pretty quickly. I don't know if she like Googled him or whatever. And so it's part of it too is when predators or abusers purposely pick people who have trauma backgrounds because they're susceptible. Like people who love to gaslight are really good at, like, it's like, I don't know if they have a sixth sense about it. It's like they can smell the air.
They must.
And they know they can like look at it seems like you can look in a crowd and you can pinpoint who you can do this to. And so he is, I hate saying it like this, like a perfect victim in the sense of like, he is alone, he is, just has a background that just will make him more susceptible to like abuse and gaslighting.
Well, and the other thing that I wanted to cover with this, and where I wanted to hit on trauma and people particularly like him, who not only have the experience of losing his mother in the traumatic way that he did. But also, like, in keeping with the theme of this discussion, it's important to remember that the reality of being an African American in America is an inherently traumatic experience. Full stop, period. Not for debate.
Yes.
Constantly. It may not all be big T, but there is constant trauma about it, period. And the other reality is that people who grow up like he did would score quite high on the ACEs test, which if you want to hear more about that, please check out our episode on Halloween. Or just research the ACEs test. Check that out. But
it's AACES.
ACES, ACEs.
But also, if you've had a lot of trauma, you don't need to look at it.
Right, yeah.
It devastates me every time I revisit it.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. Every time you look at it, it pulls your heart out because you go, oh. And 25% of people have at least two, and it's bad. It's bad what those start to trigger. But anyway, with him, what's important and what's one of the themes of this movie is that because he has been traumatized, he is more susceptible to the gaslighting because he is less likely to be able to rely on his internal measures of what is dangerous because he is in a constant state of danger. So therefore, he cannot trust his spidey senses about what is wrong here. And his friend, who has not gone through all of the same trauma, is like the voice of that, like going like, bro, get the fuck out of there. What are you doing? Like the whole time, like the friend is the voice of that, like, you're going out to a house with in the forest with white people?
Well, because when
sure,
because one of the symptoms of being like experiencing trauma is being hypervigilant, where you're kind of like on red alert all the time. And so exactly what you're saying, Ben, it can cause a situation where you can't trust that alarm anymore because it's constantly going off.
Correct.
And you can see him in this movie, like, and that's why he keeps using, which is very sweet, his friend Rodney, as like a touchstone, because he quite literally in this movie is calling him and trying to assess with him, like, am I being like off base or is this really happening? Which is a lot of times what people use therapists as. Like, as a therapist, people come to me and be like, this is the situation and this is how I'm feeling. Am I like conflating this? Does my reaction match the situation? Because I'm so in it with whatever's going on with me that I can't assess it correctly. And then it's really hard to like trust yourself and your intuition and all those kind of things.
Right, which is, I want to mention is important, is that creepy crawly system that we have that gives you the creepy crawlies about things, which is the technical term, by the way.
Excellent.
When you get that, when you get your spidey sense tingling, when something feels fucking wrong, trust it.
Yeah.
People are told all the time, especially like in even in police training and military training, and even with us providers, when we're in situations where we were working in people's houses, we were taught by the agency we worked for, if something feels wrong to you, if something doesn't feel right, get out.
Yeah. And you can't really quantify it more than that.
No, it just feels, something feels wrong. You can feel it when someone is up to some shit that they are going to hurt you, when they're preying on you, or when something is wrong or they're not well. Your body starts giving you feedback immediately that something is wrong, and we've all felt it. It's time to go. Do not argue with it. Do not debate. Do not go.
And poor Christopher in this movie, like, he is feeling it. Like, he's feeling it left, right, and center. And it's also conflated with the racism portion of it, which we've talked about, is like, am I being like is it just like prickly, gross racism shit? You know what I mean? Or is there genuine danger? And those things can be the same.
Yeah, they can. But I think that, for him as a person of color, I would imagine that it's kind of hard that there's because racism is so consistent, that it makes sense that he's trying to check with his friend to kind of like see, like, are these just like racist pricks, or like, is this a situation where they're racist and also they're going to hurt me?
And you can see that he's also trying to establish these touchstones within the movie by reaching out to the other Black people on the property, like talking to Georgina, talking to George, and I just realized their names are George and Georgina, and they were married anyway. And so that's ridiculous. So in talking to them, he's trying to find those safety spots too, of like points of contact. And even when he talks to, I can't remember what his name is in the movie. I think Logan, but like Keith Stanfield's character, Logan, I think.
That's the white person name that he has. Yeah.
He's trying to like find comfort with them, like community comfort, and probably also use them as a sounding board perhaps, and is not finding that. And so then that's also putting him in like questioning himself.
Yeah.
Right.
Like I can't even find a homeostasis or like the status quo within like my community or members of my community. Like what the fuck is going on?
When code switching.
Yes. When she says snitch and she says, you mean tattletale? I wrote that down.
You're right, and like there's when he's trying to engage the like the other Black people on the island, he's code switching, back into like the like their vernacular in ways that he would communicate naturally within his community. And when he does that, it's obviously a blatant attempt for him to escape whatever like face he's putting on to fit into this and be whatever version of acceptable Black is to these white people that he's perceiving, which is. Like, just part of the ways that Jordan Peele like masterfully weaved this story from something's kind of like, all right, this is like little bits of racism to like, no, this is a full-blown social commentary, and like goes through all the levels and layers of racism, and it just starts weaving in, and the horror of it, the slow burn horror that this is, starts building on that when you realize just how many systems exist to trap him in this. The internal ones, the external ones, the massive societal ones, the justice system, all of it. Like, it just realizes how trapped and played into this he is.
Yeah. Ugh, I think when we were watching it last night, Hannah, I sighed. Like, we were watching it, and I was like, I'm just so happy he's okay in this movie. Because, anyway.
Yeah, same.
So, it's a big topic. We've only touched on parts of it, like I was saying. So I think the last part we wanted to hit upon before we moved into treatment was just because I think one of the most striking things about this movie for people was the turn of, like, what I was saying, Rose is like the villain, and then how her affect, like the way she expresses herself post-reveal, like how still she is, and how, like, most notably when she's talking to Rodney on the phone, and her like the way she sounds, her tone of voice is very scared and concerned, and yet her face, I don't know how she acted that, to be quite honest. Like, it would be really hard to like keep a still face and then emote like that, because I feel like even if I did a voiceover where I was doing that,
comment, but I'm just gonna keep it to myself.
Probably the way her daddy did when he was getting in trouble for lying on the news.
But we just want to touch upon really quickly because she has a really odd presentation as a human being. Her brother has a very odd presentation as a human being. And so we figured people probably would want us to touch upon this in some regards before we like moved on to other things. So just very quickly, we've talked about antisocial personality at length in other podcast episodes. If you go to our referencing Halloween like 3 times in this one episode, who would have thought? In our Halloween episode about like Michael Myers Halloween, we go in extensively into antisocial. Like that's like the bulk of that episode. Yeah, is explaining that at length, ad nauseum. And so, but I think what's interesting about these two characters, his brother and his sister, is in my opinion, as a professional, the little that we know about them, because we don't really see her true presentation most of the movie. Yeah, we see her brother, but not a ton about her brother. Is that the closest diagnosis that I could fleetingly give, almost unethically give, is that they maybe have antisocial personality disorder. And what's interesting is that they're so different, and yet those would be the two diagnoses based on what little I know that I think would fit them best. And so it's kind of the interesting thing where how can two people who seem so different be dealing with like possibly the same diagnosis? Because the brother's very hyper aggressive. Yes. Like the wrestling at dinner was giving me like an ulcer. Like when he was like, just that performative like masculinity where it's like that very edge of like those guys who always seem like they're like a breath away from like wrestling, like grappling.
Right. And how many brothers do you have?
Too many. I have 6. But they're actually not quite like this actually. Like they're the more like jolly horseplay kind of thing, like roughhousing.
Right, but that's what I mean. Like, you have
Yeah.
6 of them.
Yeah.
And this feels off to you.
No, this is that guy that you see in a bar, I feel like, who's usually not even in a bar, because it's usually in a more atypical setting,
He's in the
where you're
parking
like,
lot.
is he going to start fighting about the fact that, like I like pudding better than Jello? Like, it's like that
Yeah.
kind of wacko-ness, like wackiness.
Yeah.
And part of it is, and you guys can jump in if you disagree with me, is I think when we talk about antisocial in the more like movie, glossy, cinematic way, I think we think of it more how Rose's character presents. Very stoic, like creepy serial killer, like no feelings robot energy.
Patrick Bateman.
Yes, Patrick Bateman, where she has all her trophies of all the pictures on the wall.
Yeah.
Eating like her cereal separate from the milk, which was like a really good move, like cinematic
So
note.
odd.
But I think that's more, I haven't worked with a ton of people who have antisocial personality disorder, so I can't say this super like concretely, but like I would imagine that's less the typical presentation of antisocial. That's more like the movie version. And the real life version, I think, is more like the brother. Because when we talk more about antisocial personality in the real world, it's like people who usually have this hard time being in the world and of the world. They're like getting in fights at bars. They're getting arrested. Like they can't hang on to jobs because they're fighting with authority figures all the time. Like there's more of that like not understanding or not caring about social norms and more of a uncomfortable, aggressive way versus like you figure it out and you skirt them like you're Dexter from the show Dexter.
Yeah, Dexter's another. He's like both a really great and a really terrible example of it. In the early seasons, he is, and then they start adding feelings to him, and it's like, okay,
Yeah.
like you just undid all the stuff you did, but that's fine.
So I'm curious, like, what do you guys think about what I shared? Like, does that feel true? Do you have differing opinions about that?
I don't think you're off. I think what we don't know is, what we know enough is how they were raised and cultivated and what
Yes.
beliefs that they were into. So the nature versus nurture thing, like antisocial personality disorder typically is a nature thing. Like it's not typically someone like develops that. It's like it's there. It's a personality trait that exists. It's a disorder that exists. And
What? Really? I don't think that.
you don't think that?
Isn't it more like trauma based?
Yeah.
It
can be.
It can the borderline can develop like that. It can be, but like it has people that are that detached. Like their brains are different. They're like pure like serial killers and the things we think of like true antisocial.
Like atypical thinking.
Right, atypical thinking, atypical processing, like process emotions differently. The physical way their brain functions is different.
Yeah.
And we see that like over and over in the studies like of serial killers and the ways that they present. So like I guess if I'm comparing it to that, like the most extreme end of it, something like, yes, there's usually extensive trauma, but like something in the brain changes.
And I would say a good point you're making too is like, and this is something as a clinician you'd have to like do like differentiating diagnosis with these two characters.
Right.
Is they were raised in an environment that very much normalizes violence and normalizes not treating other people like genuine human beings, like even more than just like good old fashioned racism. Like this is like you can take
Dehumanizing,
people and
do whatever
they're
you
like
want.
animals that we can play with.
Yeah.
Right, and it has to be that component of it like considered and like. So I guess it can be more like the. Not the nurture, like how they were taught by their parents. I guess just specify like yes, when people are going through like the psychopaths, they've usually been through horrible trauma, but it's the fact that it changes the way that their brain functions.
Yeah.
Is more what I meant. Mm-hmm. Not that it just doesn't come born from trauma, but it doesn't seem like these kids, whatever is going on with them, was born from trauma, but they were brought into a system that normalizes superiority and dehumanization of other people so that they can capitalize on their traits, sell them, make them science experiments and experiment on them because they experimented before they try that. And then like she keeps trophies. So I think like all the things we see with her and with the brother too, like do represent like kind of like the different ends that we see. If like one is like the overt violence and the other is the complete lack of regard or emotional connection to a victim.
Yes. And so they are good differing presentations of that. And also because of the systems in which they were raised in, you know, it would be interesting to see like how much either of them could be like rehabilitated.
Yeah.
Once they were kind of taken out of the environment that normalized this behavior from. They're both like pretty grown. So that's a strike against it. Like they're both full grown.
And I don't know. And I don't know if there's I don't know if you guys if we even know this. I have no idea.
We're postulating.
Yeah, postulating that. Also, if their parents are also both have antisocial personality disorder and or have a personality disorder in general, is there then a genetic component somehow where they would also be more likely to? Is that a thing?
Well, the thing is, not everybody that's exposed to chronic trauma develops a personality disorder.
Yeah.
Right.
So there's already some like degree of biological abnormality happening here.
Yeah, and so it is a thing of like you'd have to really piece apart.
Yeah,
and with these two characters, like what is their true deal? And it could be a mix mash.
Yeah, I think it would be really hard to get down to the actual who they actually are and how they actually are connected to themselves.
Because it'd also be a thing like people who are raised in like the Ku Klux Klan, you know what I mean? Like how much of it is truly their beliefs, versus how much it is like I have to get along with these beliefs because I'm already in a system that's very violent and dehumanizing. And so if I don't play ball, I will become the thing that is the person that's being dehumanized, and violence is against me too.
Yeah.
Which tribalism becomes a factor there as well. So it'd be too hard to tell, but I think like definitely with Rose, we see more of what feels like antisocial to me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because of her detachment to it, whereas the brother feels more like they groomed that behavior.
He's chaotic.
He is chaotic. Like they groomed and developed that behavior, but that is also like a component of it. So I think like both like presentations, like you're saying, are probably right. So like, when people ask you like, what is their deal? That's probably it.
Yeah. She takes too much like pride and like, I don't know,
in the
a
manipulation
thrill kind of out of the whole thing.
In winning. It's winning.
Yes, it's a game. It's hunting. She's hunting.
She's hunting.
So she's a serial killer.
She is most definitely a serial killer.
Yeah.
She is hunting to keep her mother's business going?
No, I think I wouldn't be surprised. This is us just straight up speculating. I wouldn't be surprised if she just likes it. Like, she happened to be in this family where this is an expectation systematically. And also, she doesn't have to keep those pictures. She doesn't have to frame them above her bed. She's already actively Googling her next kill.
Yeah.
For lack of a better term, like on the computer.
Yeah.
Before they've even like effectively transplanted Chris.
Yeah.
So she's fiending for her next hit.
Yeah.
Like she's a whole different thing.
She's a serial killer.
She's a whole different thing.
She is.
But that could be, we don't know enough about her because she's just a villain. She's a capital V villain in this movie.
Yeah.
So she doesn't have a lot of depth.
Yeah. Yeah.
But anywho. All right. So all that being said, so we're going to slide into the treatment portion of this movie. So I don't know who wants to go first. I'm assuming, I don't know. I guess I can give it to you, Ben. Who would you be treating in this movie?
Well, only, one of them survives.
Yep.
So.
Oh, right.
The rest of them all die bloody, horrible deaths, which is the poetic justice of this film. And why it kind of like people, I think, needed the ending that Jordan Peele ended up choosing.
Yeah.
Which I agree with. I understand. But you have to choose Chris.
Yeah. That's true.
His friend would probably need it too.
Yeah, because he witnessed all that. Like, he rolled up on that
He would have seen it.
Nightmare.
Yeah.
So, honestly, what I would want to do, if possible, would be to start the process with a debriefing, one of the ACA style of debriefing, where I don't know if I've talked about this on the podcast before, because I've my default answer is going to be, would they need EMDR or other trauma therapies that produce interoception?
But he'd probably
to try
be
that
so
back.
scared, Chris, to do anything that was like EMDR, because EMDR like is not hypnosis, but there's enough similarities to it where I think he would be too traumatized to trust that.
I think it would be really hard to convince him to do anything that wasn't talk therapy.
I think it would be hard to get him to trust anyone
Ever.
that looked at all like me.
Well,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I was also thinking actually that I don't even know if he would see a therapist in some ways. I mean, I think it would be so important. Clearly, he would need to see a person of color. Like, I think that's... I don't think that's out of the question. Like, I think that's something he would absolutely need. But also, I feel like there would have to be a lot of time to build up any trust in terms of doing any kind of other therapy with him.
Because you have to be vulnerable.
And he has been, and he has had another big T trauma.
Oh, like 8,000 big T traumas
So,
in this one movie.
like...
Well, I think...
I feel like the debriefing...
But,
go ahead,
yeah,
Ben. I feel
anyway,
like the debriefing... Yeah, go ahead.
The process of the debriefing, what the point of it is that it's not necessarily therapy. In that it's what it is it's the opportunity to help someone. You follow a process where you start out with kind of explaining what's going on and why you're doing it. You help people get an opportunity to stitch together the things that happen and put them together from another person's perspective too, to help fill in the gaps, because your mind doesn't remember everything. When you go through a traumatic process, it can kind of get stored in like little snapshots, and you may not remember all the details, and helping stitch those together so you get a complete picture of it stops some of the wheels of processing turning that is your brain trying to fill in the gaps that don't make sense to it. And so, like, going through a debriefing process where you sit with another person that was there and have the opportunity to go through first, like, the facts of what happened, then get into the emotional part, then get into the sensory part, and then work your way back to the thinking, rational part, and then education and normalization of it. And then you bridge into therapy. But what the purpose of doing a traumatic incident debriefing is that you help produce a way for it to be talked about so that you can start the process of interoception, of pairing that the event is over, that it is normal, that this affected you, that this is what to expect. This is how this tends to affect people. This is what it can do. And also, like, get to the point where you're helping people connect the feelings and the emotions and the sensory images and the sensory feelings, because when we go through a traumatic event, the body stores traumatic information. Like, he is likely to feel the heat of that fire when he thinks about it. He might still hear the sounds of those gunshots or the flash. He may be struggling to reprocess that as it gets stored in his memory, trying to process it. And until it is processed, until it is connected, he's going to continue to struggle to re-experience those until it makes sense to his brain. So helping him go through that process would be where I would start. And for him, I would encourage it to be done with family or other friends present, and in his case, maybe clergy if he's religious, but somebody not probably a traditional therapist, but maybe like somebody that he trusts and that within a system that he already feels safe in.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Like, I think a big part of his, for lack of a better word, like recovery would be like support systems, because he does seem like I don't know if he has family outside of like his parents who are already deceased. I don't know he doesn't say who he went to live. I don't know if he says who he went to live with after his mom died. I can't remember.
I feel like he did, but I can't remember either.
But sort of, so I think it would be like maybe he needs to stay with Rodney.
Yeah,
afterwards,
he would probably have to stay
like
with someone.
He
for a
has
little
like
bit.
like cousins, aunts, uncles, someone that he can sort of be with that can take care of him. Because part of like once we get through like just like the debriefing of it all and like being willing to be vulnerable again, because when I was watching this movie, after you know what the twist is, and when he's finally like sharing with Rose like about his childhood and his mom dying, I was like, oh my god, he's never gonna tell anyone anything ever again. Like, he's choosing to be vulnerable with her, and like seems like for maybe the first time he's been vulnerable like that with someone in a while, and it's horrible. Like, she's a villain, and so I think it makes me think of, and I don't know how this would be different, quite honestly, for like an African-American man versus like a woman, which is how I usually think of it. Typically like a white woman is when you get out of like an abusive relationship and you have to relearn like like who you are, like how to trust yourself, forgive yourself for maybe like quote unquote picking an abuser and not realizing that you picked an abuser. So having like self-compassion, like going through all of that healing work of like forgiving yourself for letting yourself be put in that situation where you're taken advantage of. But I think that would be more the deep work he would have to do, like after getting through like the 8 layers of other stuff before you could get there. So that's more like the gaslighting, abusive parts that we've talked about so far this episode.
I think so too. I don't know really what I would add in terms of treatment, especially knowing that Chris is the only person. I think the only thing that I am just going to add, just because I fucking want to, is that trying to see a therapist who is a person of color is really hard.
Especially for African American men.
Yes. So just knowing in general that can be very, very difficult to try to find someone, and that because I'm a person of color, the difference that I've had with clients who have never been able to have anybody who wasn't white, just straight up couldn't never find someone who wasn't white to be their therapist. And the shift that it seems like it makes almost automatically, I don't know if there's anything that we can do about helping people of color be able to be in this field. But what I do think is that it definitely...
Pay.
Yeah.
That's the main barrier is the pay.
Well, in school.
There is...
I mean, to be perfectly honest, which I know that I've told both of you before, like one of the only reasons why I got through grad school is because I had a partner who had a full-time job.
Yeah.
Like I would not have been the reason why the amount of Latino, Latinx people who are therapists is only 25% of us have a graduate degree is because it's really hard to go to grad school. It's really hard to do a job, to have to do an internship that lasts almost a year. Like I had to quit. I think I was working 2 jobs at the time. I had to quit both jobs in order to do the internship that I didn't get paid for. So I feel like paid internships for one thing would make a lot of fucking sense, but that's a whole other thing. But just knowing that we have been sharing some different things thanks to Brittany on our Instagram for people of color and trying to find and connect with people of color who are therapists. So just look out for that. But also there are different ways to try and find more people of color in terms of trying to find a therapist. And also just knowing that it can be really hard. And at the same time, it makes I've experienced already with the clients that I've had, it makes a really big difference. Having somebody who understands and also having somebody that they feel comfortable with talking about it with, because that's the part that I feel like is a little bit different. Not necessarily that people wouldn't be comfortable telling Brittany or Ben things, but more that they already kind of have an assumption about what you might think about it.
Right. Like I see the same thing with people wanting to see a male.
Yeah.
Like imagine not having to describe your entire fucking life to somebody that you're trying to help treat you. Like I'm sure like people that, you know, like you get that experience with Hannah, like people who've never had the opportunity to sit with someone who's going to inherently understand, or at least reasonably so, things that would take so much explaining to put in context that it's exhausting.
And we definitely go into length in this in our episode about the Wiz, and I know people don't listen to this or like all of our episodes, all of them in like a row, like in the chronological order. So we do talk about it a little bit more in that episode. We're trying not to be super repetitive for people who maybe do listen in chronological order in all our episodes. Thank you, super fans. But there is a lot of, but to get more into that too, like exactly what you were saying, Hannah, is there are a lot of resources nowadays with like social media and things like that. Like if you go to our Instagram, there's a highlight stories that has some of the stuff. And there are places that I can't think of any, obviously now I can't think of any off the top of my head, but there are several directories that are about like finding a therapist of color or therapists of different like gender identities, orientations, like queer therapists. And there's also opportunities on one of the places that I cite, and I cannot think of what it is right now, where you can, if you want to, you can pay for the training of therapists of color or therapists of queer identity orientation. And so that is one way you can help build up, if you're interested out there, that is one way you can help build up a more diverse community within therapists, is you can like quite literally pay for their educations or their CEU, like continuing education trainings, like things like that. So that there can be more diversity around there. And also some of the resources are more like places where, like, community spaces. So,
yeah.
And that might be something where more Chris is open to, is like not even necessarily group therapy, but like more like, this sounds so cheesy, but like healing spaces for like different communities.
Yeah.
So, and I'm so angry that I can't think of any off the top of my head right now, but I know there's several. If you dig on the internet, probably not even that far, you can find it. If you look at our Instagram, you might have to like look at a post and click on a link to get to another Instagram account. But like there are places that are more just like spaces now. Like you can just come and there are like informal groups or like informal workshops. And so it's a little bit more inviting, or like you can come to this space and like just like hang out. And there's other people there who look like you, who experience things you've experienced. Like we have something similar here called like the Center on Halstead, where we're in Chicago. That's for more like LGBTQ, but that's more like you just go there, you can drop in, and you can either just hang out or you can get services. So it's kind of like, I think there's more of those kind of spaces developing, which is really good for situations like exactly what we're talking about, where there could be like a lot of trepidation and fear and apprehension about like going into more formal treatment, especially in this poor Chris, where like a literal mental health professional was one of the people that abused you. So like, why would you trust a psychiatrist after a psychiatrist has just taken advantage of you?
Which is not, I don't know, it'll go as far as to take advantage of you, but people having bad experiences with therapists is not necessarily a unique thing.
Oh, hell no.
And you know, like you hear that all the time with people going, it took me a long time to get back to trusting a therapist. And like I feel like people having that in general, and knowing that there's alternative resources, that if you've had a bad experience, that you have the ability to seek alternative resources like Brittany's talking about, is important. And because it's valid. You're allowed to seek help in the ways that help you.
Yeah.
And you are allowed to try to find a therapist that is a good fit. You are allowed to tell someone that they are not a good fit, and that is okay. And we know that I am not the therapist for everyone. And I know that, and that is okay. And I would much rather have someone say, you know what, I just don't think we're really connecting. And that is fine with me, because I want that person to get the help that they need. And if that's not with me, that is okay.
Right. If I do something wrong that violates that sacred contract, like that's on me, and it's your responsibility to yourself to, you know, like make whatever choice you need to, with or without telling us. Like just like I need to, like I'm doing something else, like, and that's okay. You know, like, we're professionals, we make mistakes, things happen, but also you as the person seeking treatment are allowed to make whatever decision you need to get healthy, regardless of how anyone else is going to feel about it.
And to put a little button on that, and then we can wrap into final thoughts, is also with this situation specifically, where you might be very, like I said, all those feelings about going to see a professional, like you can bring a friend with you. Like I don't think people know this necessarily, but like he could bring Rodney with him. And if he wanted even Rodney to be in the room during like the intake, that's okay. I don't think people think that. Some, you know, and also here's to be quite honest, some therapists might push on that. They might say, can your friend wait in the waiting room? I really want to talk to you by yourself. So you can call beforehand when you schedule and be like, I'm bringing my friend with me to be in the room with me. And as long as like you've given consent, that's perfectly fine. And as long as your friend like is also consented to do that, like you don't have to do it alone.
Right.
If you aren't ready to do it alone yet. And it is more atypical, but it's not unknown. People do it. I've had people bring friends with them to intakes. Yeah, same. Because they're too scared or whatever's going on. Yep. And typically, like, you want to get to the point where you can wean that person into the waiting room. But if that's not possible, like we're trying to meet people where they're at and get them in the door. And if that's how that needs to happen. So I wouldn't be surprised if maybe the way he gets there is like maybe Rodney finds a therapist he likes or a place he likes, and Rodney comes with him. Yeah. Just because Rodney seems a little bit more like an outgoing, like affable person. A little bit more, less traumatized.
Just less traumatized, probably.
So we get into final thoughts. I don't think we're going to say anything unsurprising. This is a very fantastic movie. I think when we were watching last night, I was like, this movie is a perfect movie. We don't say that a lot on this podcast. But this movie, it does such a good job of, it's like true satire, where it takes a very real, uncomfortably real topic and so, and both directly portrays it, and then also like twists it and subverts it into like the horror genre. It's just a good job of taking something that is true and like just making it, just like putting that edge to it. And I also think it's really eye-opening for people like me, for like white people who are more like middle class, upper middle class, think that they are open-minded or more progressive. And it does a good job of outlining like how you can still be racist and be like violent with your speech without even realizing that you're being violent with your speech by othering the person around you constantly, even if it's like quote unquote complimentary, which is trash. But I love this movie. I've seen, I think me watching last night was like the 4th or 5th time I've seen it. And I've everything Jordan Peele has put out so far I really liked, and so yeah, this is a great movie. And like all the actors in it are like chef's kiss, like so good.
Yeah, I really like the movie. It's really good. It's a little bit hard to watch, just because it is for me. But other than that, it's really good. He does a really beautiful job. The acting is amazing. I can't believe that. I meant to look up how to say his last name, and now I don't remember.
Daniel Kaluuya?
Yeah.
I apologize if that's not how you say his last name.
He just did such an amazing job playing that role, just outstanding. Like the amount of distress that he was able to show when he was supposed to not be really showing any, was just amazing. It's just like a masterful film. And I really enjoyed it, and I will definitely watch it again. I think that, but I just think it was it's just a really good movie. I don't know. I don't have anything else to say.
I love it. This is the first time I didn't even watch this movie this year. Like I watched it last year, and I was able to just reread the synopsis of it and do this podcast on it because every bit of this movie was so impactful and powerful that as I think about it, I can just play it in my head. And that is how I knew I loved it when I saw it, that this movie is going to stick with me, and every bit of it I can just replay and reprocess. And the power of this film through the way they twisted and turned and warped and allowed each system to subsequently compound upon itself, the so many layers of racism, and the way it shone a huge big spotlight on that while telling a micro story that allowed you to connect not only with the experiences of the characters that you were seeing and the story you were seeing, but how that story could have played out in any number of court cases or situations where someone went through something where they were victimized and ended up in a situation where now the story's been turned on them and now the justice system's working against them, or the informal justice system is working against them and leading to violence or lynchings or things that have happened. This movie was just done in such a masterful way that it was able to call out all of that at once, and it deserved every bit of accolades it ever got, including the Academy Award. And just kudos to Jordan Peele from going from someone who can make you laugh about race to someone who can give you this like absolute gut puncher of a horror film, psychological thriller that plays on every bit of the way that the insidious racism exists within our country.
Absolutely.
And with that, we will wrap it up. So you can find us at Facebook and Instagram at Popcorn Psychology. You can find us on Twitter at popcorn_psych. You always feel free to email us at popcornpsychology@gmail.com. We take suggestions, people like, we also take feedback. If you have any like thoughts about this movie, like we've said before, like neither three of us are African American, so if there's something we missed or something we missaid, feel free to email us if you would like. You don't have to. And yeah, just feel free to find us. Like I said, we're starting spooky season a little early because I think like most people we need to. And so we look forward to talking about more spooky movies soon.